Hey friends, I am back. We are going to pick up on page 278, very top of the page, module 9. We're finishing up paleontology. Ready? Here we go. Another classic example of this kind of fossil is Australopithecus afarensis. This creature is supposed to be a transitional form between apes and humans. Although fossils of several creatures from genus Australopithecus have been discovered over the years, the best example is a partial skeleton of the A. afarensis species that has been nicknamed Lucy. This skeleton was discovered by Donald Johnson in 1974 near Hadar, Ethiopia. This was not the first discovery of fossils from this genus, and it was not the last. However, this skeleton is important because it is the most complete skeleton we have from this genus. A sketch of that skeleton is shown below. Although this might not look like a complete skeleton to you, it is actually quite a find. One of the problems with studying fossils is the fact that they tend to be very incomplete. As a result, scientists are left to speculate on the nature of a creature based often on far too little evidence. Many fossils were proclaimed intermediate links based on just a few tiny fragments of bone. Perhaps the greatest example was Nebraska man. Scientists found a single tooth among the remains of some of the ancient tools. Based on that single tooth, scientists proclaimed that they had found one of the intermediate links between man and ape. They had artists draw full pictures of Nebraska man based only on a tooth. The pictures looked very convincing. A hulking, brutish figure that indeed looked like a link between man and ape. Later on, it was conclusively shown that the tooth actually belonged to a peccary, which is a certain type of pig. Thus, you should never believe the drawings that you see in books. Find out what fossils exist for the supposed creature. You will most likely be amazed how few there are. This specimen of Australopithecus afarensis, however, is quite a nice specimen, so we can learn a lot from it. When scientists examine such a specimen, they typically look at a few key bones that are characteristic of a certain kind of creature. For example, jawbones are often very distinctive in most animals. Notice how the jawbone of Australopithecus afarensis is shaped like a V. This is very distinctive of an ape. Also, the ratio between the size of the humerus and the size of the radius, or ulna, is also helpful in determining the kind of creature that Australopithecus afarensis was. Once again, the ratio of these bones indicates that Australopithecus afarensis is an ape. In fact, each bone in this entire skeleton indicates that Australopithecus afarensis is an ape. If the bones indicate that it is an ape, why is Australopithecus afarensis considered an intermediary link? Well, the hip joint and ankle joint can be constructed in such a way as to make Australopithecus afarensis stand upright in a relatively comfortable manner. This is unusual in apes. Most apes tend to be comfortable on all fours, whereas humans tend to be comfortable standing upright. Thus, Because it is possible that Australopithecus afarensis might have stood upright, it is considered an intermediate link between man and ape. There is a problem with this interpretation, however. Recent studies seem to indicate that Lucy most likely walked by using her knuckles. For example, Dr. Brian Richmond examined the wrist bones of two species in genus Australopithecus, A. afarensis and A. Anemen. Sorry, guys. A. afarensis and A. anamensis. They demonstrated that the wrists of these two species were quite similar to those of modern chimpanzees, which walk on both their hind legs and their knuckles. Thus, based on the wrist, you would classify Lucy as an ape that walks on its knuckles. This is further supported by a study by Dr. Fred Spoor, who did CAT scans on the inner ears of members of genera Australopithecus and Paranthropus. Genus Paranthropus contains fossil creatures that are very similar to those in genus Australopithecus. In fact, some paleontologists think that these two genera should be combined, but that is still hotly debated. Spoor's study is important, as the inner ear is where balance is maintained. And if a creature walks upright, it needs a significantly different sense of balance from a creature that does not. Well, what did Spoor find? His paper states, quote, "The semicircular canal dimensions in crania from southern Africa, attributed to Australopithecus and Paranthropus, resemble those of the extant great apes." End quote. The term extant just means currently living. Thus, Spoor's conclusion is that the inner ear of the members of genus Australopithecus is very similar to that of currently living apes. This indicates that they probably did not walk upright, at least not habitually. Once again, then, whether or not Australopithecus afarensis is an intermediate link depends on your point of view. If you want to believe in macroevolution, you can look at the possibility that it could stand upright and conclude that it is a transitional form. If you do not want to believe in macroevolution, you can look at the major features of the skeleton and the details of its wrists and inner ears and conclude that it is not. The point, however, is quite clear. If macroevolution happened, the fossil record should be littered with intermediate links, as Darwin predicted. Instead, macroevolutionists can only present a few highly questionable ones. These supposed intermediate links closely resemble one of the two species they're supposed to link together. If intermediate links truly existed in the fossil record, you would think that at least one unambiguous intermediate link could be found somewhere. All right, let's move on to the Cambrian explosion. We're in the very middle of page 280, the Cambrian explosion. Are we ready? Before we leave our discussion of the fossil record, we have to mention probably the greatest problem that faces macroevolutionists today. The problem exists as a result of some fossils that were rediscovered in the mid-1980s. And based on those fossils, we know that at least the bottom portion of the geological column, as presented in figure 9.2, and all introductory biology and geology textbooks to our knowledge, is incorrect. You see, as presented in figure 9.2, the geological column is used to give the impression that the fossil record indicates that only the simplest multicellular life existed in the years represented by the Cambrian rock, 570 to 500 million years ago. And then, through the years represented by the Ordovician rock, 500 to 435 million years ago, the life got more complex. This supposedly continued through to the times represented by the Silurian rock, 410 to 435 million years ago, as well as the time represented by Devonian rock, 360 to 410 million years ago. As a result, the diverse life that we see in the oceans did not fully evolve until around 400 million years ago. Now, remember, all of these numbers for how many millions of years ago these things happened are based on a lot of assumptions, and we don't have time to go into all those assumptions. However, we are discussing how macroevolutionists interpret the geological column, and this is how they do it. Based on the rediscovery we mentioned earlier, we now know that the macroevolutionist view of the lower layers of the geological column is simply false. What do we mean by rediscovery? Well, in the early 1900s, Charles Walcott, a paleontologist, discovered a lot of fossils in a layer of Cambrian rock called the Burgess Shale. However, these fossils were not what Walcott expected. Remember, according to the geological column, only the simplest of multicellular life was supposed to have existed in the times represented by Cambrian rock. However, Walcott found thousands of fossils of very complex life. In fact, by the time the collection was complete, Walcott had found representatives from every major animal phylum that exists in our classification scheme. See figure 9.5 on the next page. Okay, let's pause there. We're coming upon 13 minutes. We're going to pick up this very last paragraph on page 280, and I'll see you the next time. Bye, friends. Thanks for listening.